Okay, chapter 27, Romanticism, Realism, and Photography, in particular in Europe and America. So we're looking at around 1800 to around 1870 and a little past that. And what's going on during this time is the Napoleon era. So there's going to be the fall of the French kingdom, and Napoleon is going to rise up and pretty much take over and create the French Empire. And then over time, he's going to be defeated, of course, and it's going to be an element of self defeat because he's going to push his army into Russia and then be pushed back. And that's going to put a big damper on his ego, so to speak. And then he's going to lose a very important battle against the English in Waterloo. And that essentially is going to make him have to surrender, be exiled for 6 years, and then ultimately pass away on an island. But it is Napoleon that is bringing upon the beginnings and the advent of this period of Romanticism and Realism, and then later on the photography. Also during this time, as we're moving away from the Napoleon rule, we're going to get into Industrial Revolution. And with the Industrial Revolution in England and in Europe in particular overall, it's going to give extra wealth to individual cities. So individual cities are really going to start to be on the map, so to speak. And with that development of these big cities around Europe, you're going to have a population increase in those cities. And with that population increase, there's going to be more individual wealth developing in this middle class section of society. And there's going to be certain interest in the natural world derived from this romanticism that I'll talk about here in just a little bit. That's going to increase like a love for landscape genre painting by them being in this urban setting and being dwellers of an urban setting. It's going to make them reflect back on the natural open fielded and wooded and wilderness landscapes that they may have grown up in, or their mother and father may have grown up in, and they're going to want these landscape paintings placed inside of their urban homes. So landscape painting is going to be a very big deal, especially as we move out of Romanticism and into Realism in particular. So around 1800 to 1870, it's going to be a lot about that Neoclassicism that we talked about, and when we talk about Napoleon here, that Neoclassicism is still present, like we saw at the end of chapter 26. So that interest in the reason and logic that was originally coupled with the Renaissance classic painters and artists are going to find their way into this neoclassical period, coupling itself with the Enlightenment, and from important thinkers and philosophers like Voltaire, and even physicists like Isaac Newton. That's going to be part of this neoclassical period, and Napoleon is going to want that. He's going to want that neoclassical style, and he's going to ask David, who we talked about with the oath of Orashi in the last chapter. He's going to ask David to essentially be his number one painter. So David's going to come back into the scene. He actually was imprisoned during the revolutions against the Louis family of the French kingdom, and then he was incarcerated. And then whenever he got out, he was sought after by Napoleon, who's the one who essentially replaced himself or put himself in a ruler's position for France after the fall of the French kingdom under the Louis the 15th, after Louis the 14th. So let's look at a couple of the paintings of David, and we're going to begin with figure 27.2a. And this is what is going to make David the first painter of the empire under Napoleon. And again, this is Napoleon Bonaparte. So if you haven't heard of him, this is the time frame. Or if you don't know a lot about him, but you heard his name, this is the time frame in which he's essentially running all of Europe. Again, until he pushes all the way, and he was even considered the king of Italy. So he's running the show. And he's pushing all the way up to Russia. That's where he gets pushed back, and then he loses in Waterloo, which is in Flanders, or present-day Belgium. And then after that, his empire just it collapsed. But so what we have here is this is Napoleon crossing Saint Bernard Pass, and when David got out of prison from the previous revolutions before the rise of Napoleon, he did a series of portraits of Napoleon, and Napoleon saw them, and he loved them. And then once he saw this painting, he went to David and he asked him to become the first painter of the empire after this. Okay, and then after this painting, he went on and was asked to paint the coronation of Napoleon, which is figure 27.3. And Napoleon used David to design public images of him. And he wanted him to be associated with the classical past. So that's why he gravitated towards David's neoclassical technique and style. If David would have been a non-neoclassical painter, and he would have focused on other avenues of genre, let's say still life, he would not have been sought after by Napoleon. But Napoleon saw that David had an affinity for the classical renderings done during the Renaissance. So Napoleon wanted to couple himself with the classics from the Renaissance, which would also ultimately connect him to the Greco-Roman antiquity that happened many centuries back. So that's why he sought after David, to make him look like he was part of this antiquity, part of this classical history. Napoleon wanted to be part of that. So he made him his first painter of the empire. And what David would do, as we see here with the coronation of Napoleon, is he created a historical depiction of what was happening in that contemporary time with Napoleon being coronated, all right, as like the emperor of France, of the emperor of Europe, so to speak. So that historical depiction has a lot to do with the Roman aspects that went all the way back to antiquity, where there was an honest, truthful, historical depiction of what was actually going on. Now, we know how honest it is based off of a couple things. One is that everybody in the painting is actually of life size. Even Napoleon. Napoleon was he was smaller in stature. Okay, he was a shorter man. And he's depicted in that he's not depicted any larger or greater in size than what he actually was. So a lot of his entourage, a lot of the individuals and ministers that are around him, even the Pope himself, is much larger than Napoleon. But that is a historical truth, a historical depiction, which yields to the connection of the classics, which is coming from the Roman historical depiction of honesty of an individual. Don't try to idealize what the individual looks like. Make them look the way that they look. That's what, again, makes this a neoclassical. It's attaching itself to that Roman technique of historical depiction. Also, there's a connection to the French in that this is held, this coronation, inside of Notre Dame, which is a Gothic cathedral in France. So there's a connection to the importance of what the French did in the medieval time, which is the Gothic church and the Gothic cathedral. And Notre Dame and Chartres are the two main cathedrals in the Gothic style that we know of today. And another thing is there is an interest by Napoleon and also by David in this neoclassical style, dating all the way back to something that we haven't touched in this class, but it's called the Byzantine. And I mentioned the Byzantine a few times with some other artists and the interest in the Byzantine. And one was El Greco, coming from the Greek island of Crete. And the Byzantine was very much about this this emotional feel and this layering of individuals and creating a formula of importance. And the three main levels of importance with the Byzantine, mosaic painter and mosaic designers and painters during that time, coming in late antiquity, is one, and primarily the emperor, the ruler. In that time of Byzantine, the beginnings of Byzantine, early Byzantine, it was Justinian. And Justinian was coming out of the Constantine era, which had moved the shift of focusing on multiple gods and then worshiping just one singular god, Christianity, i.e. Christianity. So Justinian was the emperor of that time in the Byzantine, and he set up a formula during this Byzantine time where the emperor is considered the main individual in the composition, in the mosaic or in the painting. And then right behind him will be the clergy and the Pope who leads the clergy. Okay? So that's what we have here, is those two levels plus a third, which is the soldiers and everybody else who is present to observe the coronation. So that formula of three is present here in the coronation of Napoleon. Napoleon and his wife being coronated with the crown is front and center. And then next to him on this same field is the Pope, right behind him. Now Napoleon is standing, which makes him the primary individual, and the Pope is sitting, which makes him the secondary, but they're still on the same playing field, so they're considered one, which is something that the Byzantines did. And then behind the Pope is the clergy, which is that second group, and then surrounding the whole event are the soldiers, and then the maidservants and everybody who's there on behalf of the Queen. So it goes Napoleon, then the papacy, kind of one, then the papacy's clergy, two, and then the soldiers, three. And then the maidservants are four, but we really just keep it within that three formula. So this is a very Byzantine technique, okay? And that is, again, Roman. The Byzantine period is considered Eastern Rome. All right, it's where Constantine brought the activities of Rome over to what will be called Constantinople, and then the Roman Empire was governed out of Constantinople, which is present-day Turkey. Okay, so that's the importance of Neoclassicism with Napoleon directly. And then one of David's students, by the name of Ingres, is going to become very dominant during this time of Neoclassicism during the Napoleon era as well. And he is going to be known for the same kinds of techniques in the Neoclassical period. But he's going to kind of break away from it a little bit. But before he breaks away from it, you can see the elements of Neoclassicism in figure 27.6, Apotheosis of Homer. All right. And within this, just real quick, know that he's emphasizing all the same components that we see in David. You see the classical embodiment, you see the clustering of individuals spread throughout the canvas, a central point, a central formula. Everything is triangulated and very architectural and linear in nature. Okay? So that's what makes this a very neoclassical approach. But Ingres is going to do something a little different than his teacher, David. And he's going to break away from David's formula. And you can see that in figure 27.7. And you may be asking yourself, what does this have to do with Napoleon? This is Napoleon's sister. This is Napoleon Bonaparte's sister. But what Ingres is going to do is he's going to take from the classical period, this is still considered neoclassical, but it also has some other elements to it. I'm going to talk about that. And it's going to kind of segue into the Romanticism period, which is going to follow the neoclassical period. So what he does, he actually looks at the old Greek pots, like the amphoras, all right, from old Greek pottery. And the old Greek pottery would do what's called red figureware and black figureware. And they would create incised and very thin brushed lines to develop the narrative on the surface of the pottery. They even had certain kinds of sharing pots where they would drink the wine, and then as it was all drunk by everybody in the room, in the banquet hall, or whatever the gathering might be, then an image was revealed in the bottom that often associated with the philosophies and the mythologies of the Greek philosophers at that time. So Ingres, in figure 27.7, is showing an example of pulling that lineation that was found in the Greek pottery. And that's what really makes this a neoclassical painting to begin with. And it's called a Grande Odalisque. And another thing that makes it very neoclassical is that he's going to place the figures in the foreground instead of and you can see that also in figure 27.6 in Apotheosis of Homer, is they're all clustered in the foreground. There's no clustering of individuals in the middle ground or in the background. It's in the foreground. And then with figure 27.7, she, Napoleon's sister, is all in the foreground. Okay, so that's a very classical and then now neoclassical decision. And it comes from the Greek relief carvings that you'll see throughout the temples in Athens and throughout Greece. All right? And so this painting is reflecting that, keeping the figures in the foreground as if they've been carved in relief, which is something that the Greeks would do. They would go from low or bas to high relief carvings on their temples out of marble. And then these paintings are reflecting that classical style. But that changes a little bit here, and he starts to become a little more what's called romantic. And what the romantic painters are going to be interested in is emotion, and not being too consumed by realism, by reason and logic. They're going to be more about unlocking imagination and creating a sense of fantasy and sublime and almost dream-like scape emotions. So he's doing that a little bit here, and this is going to actually transition us into the Romanticism in this chapter. Now, how he does that, well, first of all, it's Napoleon's sister. We already talked about that. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Hold on just one second. Let me talk about a few more things that makes this still classical. One other thing, or two actually, or really three. Sorry for the confusion. Three. One is that she's reclining, and the reclining nude woman was something that was very indicative of the classical period coming out of antiquity. So moving out of medieval and into the Renaissance. So the reclining nude woman and Napoleon's sister being in this position is something that connects back to classicism, okay, during the Renaissance, that transitional period in particular, into the beginning and early stages of the Renaissance. The other thing is Ingres is pulling from Raphael's use of the head. Two things: smaller in scale, and then also the way in which it's bent to the side, the way she's twisting, looking back at you. That's Raphael. That's a very classical Raphael technique. The third is that he taps into the mannerisms of Italy with the elongated features. And again, by elongating the features, the legs and the arms, and curving her back as if she's 2.5 people with these elongations, it makes the head look even more diminutive, even smaller, which emphasizes the whole Raphael style even more so. All right. So again, that's what makes it very neoclassical. But again, it has a tinge of Romanticism, and the tinge of Romanticism is the environment in which she's in, which is a Turkish environment called a Turkish harem, Harem. And that creates a broad aspect of imagination. Like, why is she present in this Turkish environment if she's the emperor's sister in France? So it's starting to create this imaginary environment that's been designed and contrived to couple with the Neoclassicism. And remember, the Enlightenment, like I mentioned in the last chapter, last video, is not only about reason and truth, but it's also about emotion. And both of them are important. You have Rousseau with the importance of emotion and imagination and the heart, and then you have Voltaire and Locke and Hobbes that are all about the importance of reason and truth, and Immanuel Kant and the Critique of Pure Reason, and all these different philosophers at this time. So ethics and morality on one side with reason and truth, and then emotion and imagination on the other. Okay? Now, let's really get into what is this Romanticism. We're going to start with William Blake, figure 27.9. So what the Romanticism is, let's see, what time do we have? Oh, okay. Okay. We'll start with Romanticism, and then we'll see how far we get. Might have to get into another video. So with Romanticism, it's meant to be like freedom of thought. Okay, and that's again coming from Rousseau, Roussseau. And it's about imagination versus reason. And in this type of painting is going to happen in between the neoclassical work as well as the realism, which we'll talk about at the end of the chapter. And it's going to embrace intuition, emotion, a sense of sublime and fantasy that's going to be derived from the focus on the Gothic and medieval period. And it wants you to embrace the fear of your emotions. So essentially what that means, through intuition, through emotion, through imagination, and through your dreams, which we'll see with Francesco Goya, is you're going to unlock new possibilities. And the reason that Rousseau and these romantic painters, the Romanticism, is very much not headstrong against reason and truth like with the neoclassical approaches, because you'll see kind of both in these pieces of artwork, the neoclassicism and Romanticism. But the reason that they're focusing so heavily on emotion is because it's therapeutic, in that they believe that too much reason and too much truth can stifle your imagination and can stifle your spirituality and those different subtle elements of existence as a human being. So part of your psyche may not be used if you're too focused on the analytical of reason and truth, if you don't allow your heart to open up to imagination and fantasy and, again, your intuition. So their artwork is very much about trying to balance both, but definitely focusing more on breaking out with new ideas. And that's why the artwork has a tendency to look the way that it does. For example, with Blake here, it's called Ancient of Days, and it still uses neoclassical elements of eternity found in math. You can see that with the compass that he's holding up in his hand, in his left hand. This is supposed to be God. And so that element of reason and truth is there and is present in this. This is a print, by the way. It's an etch. And you should remember what an etch is. Right? I'm sorry, this is an engraved piece of work. So engraved means that he's taken the metal plate, he's carved in to the metal plate to give these hard lines, and then he's transferred the image over. Then he came back in and colored it later. So it's a metal relief etching. Etching, not engraving. My apologies. Etching. All right, and then he comes back in and he hand colors it himself. Just probably with watercolor or something like that. But it still uses the neoclassical elements with the instrument, the mathematical compass or protractor that's present there to kind of measure out how he's going to develop the earthly realm using this mathematical instrument and tool. So that's a big part of why it's neoclassical, plus the anatomy itself. So the body and the muscularity of the body is something that was very much sought after in the Renaissance. So you have the anatomy of God's body as well as the mathematical instrumentation. So that's the neoclassical or classical element to it. What's romantic about it is that he referred to his dreams for inspiration with the overall design and composition of the work. He didn't look out into nature, he looked into his dreams. All right? And with that, he felt that by looking into his dreams, it would make the artwork seem more spiritual in nature. All right? Which is something that has a lot to do with the Romanticism, is they want to focus on spiritualism. They want to focus on the sublime nature of spiritualism and kind of the fantasy that sometimes can go with that, being more of an ethereal and less temporal, like subtle way of thinking. So with that, we can look at Blake's piece and see with the Ancient of Days that it is a combination of neoclassical techniques as well as this sublime sense of Romanticism, with the wind blowing his beard to the side, giving this element of emotion and this mood of calm and sophisticated, but still very dreamlike in regards to the creation of the earthly realm that's present here in his piece. So I tell you what, we'll leave it at that, and then we'll get into Goya to get back into Romanticism with Goya, and then we'll talk about Goya. Then we'll talk about Geertruida, and then we'll talk about Rudess. Then we're going to get into landscape. All right. So we'll try to talk about all those in the next video, and then you'll have one video that will deal with realism in photography. Okay.